Captain Sarah Chen stood at attention in the sterile white briefing room aboard the Galactic Defense Coalition Station Nexus 7. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the three alien officers seated behind the metal table. Their expressions ranged from barely concealed disgust to open contempt. Commander Vexhai, a tall Zenthari with blue-scaled skin and 4 arms, tapped his claws against the table's surface. His serpentine neck swayed slightly as he spoke, his voice carrying the typical arrogance of his species. Captain Chen, your recent actions during the Kepler 442 incident have been deemed inappropriate by this tribunal. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her military bearing. The Kepler 442 incident had been 3 weeks ago, when her unit had discovered a mining colony under attack by pirates. While the alien command structure had debated proper protocols and jurisdictional authority, Sarah had acted on her own initiative, leading her mixed-species squad in a rescue operation that saved over 300 civilian lives. Sir, my actions resulted in 0 friendly casualties and the successful evacuation of all colonists, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. The pirates were neutralized with minimal collateral damage. The second officer, a crystalline being called Sub-Commander Thys, chimed in with sounds like breaking glass. Her translator rendered the words in a cold, mechanical tone. The issue is not the outcome, human. The issue is your blatant disregard for proper chain of command. You acted without authorization from Sector Command. Sarah bit back her first response. She wanted to point out that while they were following proper channels, civilians were dying. But she'd learned over her 5 years in the Coalition that pointing out such inconvenient truths rarely improved her situation. The third officer, Colonel Mordun of the Hegemony, leaned forward. His insectoid features were impossible to read, but his tone carried clear disdain. Humans, he clicked, mandibles working, always rushing in without thought. Your species lacks the discipline necessary for proper military conduct. With respect, sir, Sarah began, but Vexhai cut her off with a sharp gesture. Respect? The Zenthari's head tilted at an unnatural angle. You speak of respect while your file shows a pattern of insubordination stretching back to your academy days. Unauthorized reconnaissance missions, failure to follow retreat orders, engaging enemy forces without proper backup. He gestured to a holographic display showing Sarah's service record. You are everything wrong with human integration into our forces. Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. Every incident he mentioned had been a situation where following orders would have meant abandoning people to die. The unauthorized reconnaissance had revealed an enemy ambush that would have decimated her unit. The retreat order she'd ignored was given by an officer who hadn't realized there were still wounded soldiers in the field. Each time, her actions had saved lives. The decision of this tribunal is unanimous, Sub-Commander Thys announced, her crystalline form catching the light as she stood. Captain Sarah Chen, you are hereby stripped of your commission and expelled from the Galactic Defense Coalition effective immediately. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 5 years of service, countless lives saved, and this was how it ended. She'd known this moment might come eventually. Humans were still the newest members of the Coalition, barely tolerated by most of the older species who saw them as reckless warmongers. Your security clearance is revoked, Colonel Mordun continued. Your access to Coalition facilities is terminated. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate this station. Sarah snapped to attention one final time. Understood, sirs. As she turned to leave, Commander Vexhai called out, Oh, and Chen? Your former unit will be reassigned to proper leadership. Commander Zakhtar will be taking over your squad immediately. Perhaps under competent command they'll learn proper discipline. Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the control panel. Commander Zakhtar was a by-the-books Zenthari officer, known for his strict adherence to protocol and his particular disdain for human military tactics. Her squad, a mix of humans and a few alien allies who'd learned to trust her leadership style, would not adapt well to his command. "Sir, my squad has worked together for 2 years. They know each other's capabilities and—" "Your former squad," Vexhai interrupted, "will adapt or be replaced. That is no longer your concern." The dismissal was clear. Sarah nodded curtly and walked out, the door hissing shut behind her. The corridor beyond was busy with coalition personnel going about their duties, but she felt utterly alone. The mixed-species crew members she passed offered various expressions of sympathy or indifference. A few humans looked like they wanted to say something, but thought better of it in such a public space. Her quarters were a short walk through the station's main residential sector. As she packed her few personal belongings into a standard-issue duffel bag, Sarah reflected on how little she'd accumulated during her years of service. A few photos from Earth, some books, her grandmother's compass that had somehow survived 3 interstellar wars, and her collection of unit patches from various missions. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. She opened it to find Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, her former second-in-command, standing in the hallway. The burly ex-Marine looked furious. "Captain, this is complete bull—" "Sergeant," Sarah cut him off, glancing around the corridor. "I'm no longer your captain, and you need to be careful what you say in public spaces." Marcus stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. "Sarah, the whole squad knows what happened. This is retaliation for making them look bad at Kepler 442. Sarah continued packing, not trusting herself to speak immediately. Marcus was right, of course. Her success at Kepler 442 had highlighted the Coalition Command's failure to act quickly. While she'd been saving lives, they'd been in committee meetings debating whether intervention was warranted. "Rodriguez, you need to make this transition work," she said finally. "Zakhtar is going to be looking for any excuse to break up the unit. Don't give him one." "The alien members of the squad are just as pissed as the humans," Marcus replied. "Kriya has been pacing her quarters like a caged animal since she heard, and Dex hasn't spoken a word to anyone." Sarah wasn't surprised. Kriya was a Thakarian warrior who'd initially been assigned to their unit as a form of punishment detail. Over time, she'd become one of Sarah's most trusted soldiers. Dex, a Valderan technician, was naturally quiet, but his silence likely indicated deep concern. "They'll need to find a way to work with Zakhtar," Sarah said, shouldering her bag. "Their careers depend on it." Marcus grabbed her arm gently. "What about your career? You can't just walk away from this." Sarah looked around the small quarters that had been her home for the past 2 years. "I don't have a choice, Marcus. I'm done." She made her way to the station's departure bay, where a transport was scheduled to take discharged personnel to the nearest civilian spaceport. A few other passengers were already waiting, mostly alien civilians and a couple of human traders. Sarah found a seat in the back and tried to ignore the stares from other passengers who recognized her uniform. As the transport prepared for departure, Sarah's personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as unknown, but when she opened it, she recognized the encryption signature. It was from Admiral Patricia Hawkins, one of the highest-ranking humans in the Coalition fleet. "Sarah," the message began, "I've heard about the Tribunal's decision. I want you to know that there are those of us who recognize the value of officers who put lives before politics. When you're ready to return to service, contact me. There may be opportunities outside traditional Coalition channels." Sarah read the message twice before deleting it. The idea of continuing military service in some capacity was tempting, but right now she just wanted to go home. Earth seemed very far away, and civilian transport would take weeks to get there. The transport shuddered slightly as it disengaged from the station's docking bay. Through the small viewport, Sarah watched Nexus 7 shrink into the distance. Somewhere on that station, Her former squad was probably preparing for their first briefing under Commander Zach Tarr. She hoped they would be smart enough to keep their heads down and follow orders, even if those orders went against everything they'd learned under her command. As the transport entered hyperspace, Sarah closed her eyes and tried not to think about what came next. For the first time in her adult life, she had no mission, no responsibility for other people's lives, and no clear path forward. The uncertainty should have been liberating, but instead it felt like falling into an endless void. The transport's intercom crackled to life, announcing their estimated arrival time at Kepler Station, a major civilian hub where passengers could book passage to their final destinations. Sarah calculated the time and cost to get to Earth from there. Her discharge pay would cover basic transport and maybe a few weeks of living expenses while she figured out what civilians did with their lives. She opened her bag and pulled out one of the unit patches, a circular emblem showing a stylized Earth surrounded by stars and the motto, "First in, last out," in multiple languages. It had been her squad's unofficial motto, something they'd adopted after their third successful rescue mission. Now it felt like a relic from someone else's life. Sarah tucked the patch away and settled in for the long journey ahead, unaware that light years away, events were already in motion that would soon make her discharge seem like the least important thing that had happened that day. Commander Zach Tarr arrived at the squad's briefing room exactly on schedule, his bearing rigid and precise in the way that only a career Zenthari officer could achieve. His blue scales gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his four arms moved in perfectly coordinated gestures as he reviewed the holographic displays floating before him. The 12 members of Sarah's former unit sat at attention around the circular table, their faces carefully neutral. Sergeant Rodriguez maintained his professional demeanor despite the anger still burning in his chest. Beside him, Kria's predatory yellow eyes tracked every movement the new commander made, while Dex's slender fingers drummed silently against his leg in a nervous rhythm only other Valderans would recognize. "I am Commander Zach Tarr," the Zenthari began, his translated voice carrying an unmistakably condescending tone. "I have reviewed your unit's files extensively. What I found was disturbing." He gestured, and a holographic display showed their mission history over the past 2 years. Successful operations glowed green, while several incidents were highlighted in amber or red. Unauthorized deviations from mission parameters, failure to await proper clearance for engagement, excessive resource expenditure, and a general pattern of reckless behavior that has somehow been labeled as initiative in your reports. Private Johnson, one of the younger humans, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd joined the unit 8 months ago and had quickly learned to trust Sarah's judgment in combat situations. Under her leadership, their squad had one of the highest success rates in the coalition. But Zach Tarr seemed determined to focus on their unorthodox methods rather than their results. "These behaviors end now," Zach Tarr continued. "You will operate according to coalition protocols. Every action will be cleared through proper channels. Every decision will follow established procedures. There will be no more cowboy heroics." Kria's claws extended slightly, scraping against the table's surface. In her culture, such criticism of a respected leader bordered on insult, and her warrior instincts were responding accordingly. Rodriguez noticed her reaction and caught her eye, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. They couldn't afford to give Zach Tarr ammunition against them. "Sir," Rodriguez said carefully, "our unit has developed effective tactical coordination over the past 2 years. Your success rate," Zach Tarr interrupted, "is irrelevant if it came at the cost of proper military discipline. Results achieved through insubordination are not results to be celebrated." The commander moved to stand directly behind Rodriguez's chair. "You will find, Sergeant, that I am not as flexible as your previous commanding officer. Orders are to be followed precisely, not interpreted as suggestions." Dex finally spoke up, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the silent room. "Commander, our unit composition was specifically designed for rapid response scenarios. Your training, Zaktar cut him off, was clearly inadequate if it produced soldiers who believe they can improvise during military operations. You will undergo retraining to coalition standards immediately." The next few hours were a systematic dismantling of everything Sarah's unit had built. Zaktar reassigned personnel to different shifts, breaking up the carefully coordinated teams that had learned to fight together. He implemented new procedures that required authorization for even basic reconnaissance activities. Most damaging of all, he separated the human and alien members of the squad into different operational groups. "Integration experiments have proven unsuccessful," he explained when Rodriguez questioned the segregation. "Species-specific units demonstrate better compliance with command structures." By the end of the first week under Zaktar's command, the unit's morale had plummeted. The new commander seemed more interested in compliance reports than combat readiness. Training exercises focused on procedural adherence rather than tactical effectiveness. Several members had already submitted transfer requests, though none had been approved. The breaking point came during their first real mission under Zaktar's leadership. A distress call came in from a research station in the Rigel system, reporting pirate raids on nearby shipping lanes. The research facility housed over 200 civilian scientists and their families, making it a potential target for hostage-taking or worse. Under Sarah's leadership, the unit would have launched immediately, while intelligence gathered additional information en route. Instead, Zaktar insisted on following proper protocols. Authorization requests were filed. Intelligence assessments were conducted. Risk analyses were prepared and submitted to 3 different departments for review. 6 hours passed before they received clearance to deploy. When they finally arrived at the research station, the pirates had already struck. The facility's defensive systems had been overwhelmed, and initial scans showed multiple hull breaches and life support failures in several sections. Emergency beacons indicated survivors, but they were scattered throughout the damaged structure. "Command, this is Unit 7 requesting permission to begin immediate rescue operations," Rodriguez transmitted from their transport ship. Zaktar's response was immediate and firm. "Negative. We will establish a perimeter and await the arrival of specialized rescue units." Rodriguez stared at his commander in disbelief. "Sir, life support is failing in multiple sections. The civilians won't survive long enough for rescue teams to arrive." "The protocols are clear, Sergeant. Combat units do not engage in rescue operations without proper support and clearance." Kriya growled low in her throat, her translation device rendering it as words of disgust in her native language. The Thakarian warrior had participated in dozens of rescue missions under Sarah's command and couldn't understand the logic of watching people die for the sake of proper procedure. "Commander," Dex said quietly, his sensors detecting rapidly deteriorating conditions within the research station. "I'm reading 17 life signs in Section C7. Their oxygen levels are critical." Zaktar studied his displays with methodical precision. Noted, "Include that information in our situation report to Sector Command." Private Johnson, barely 22 and still new enough to speak without thinking, blurted out, "Sir, Captain Chen would have had us in there by now." The silence that followed was deafening. Zaktar's head turned toward Johnson with serpentine slowness, his 4 arms crossing in a gesture that conveyed both authority and threat. "Captain Chen," he said, each word precisely enunciated, "was relieved of command for exactly this kind of reckless thinking. Perhaps you would prefer to join her in civilian life?" Johnson's face went pale, but before he could respond, alerts began screaming across their instruments. The research station's main reactor was destabilizing, damaged by the pirate attack and now threatening to explode. The blast radius would include their current position. "All units, emergency withdrawal," Zaktar ordered immediately. Execute emergency jump to minimum safe distance. Rodriguez watched in horror as their transport began to move away from the station. Through the viewports, he could see the research facility growing smaller, taking with it nearly 200 innocent lives that they were abandoning to maintain proper protocol. "Sir, we can still extract survivors from the outer sections," he pleaded. "Negative. The risk assessment clearly indicates—" Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of his military career. He stood up, his hand moving to his sidearm, though he didn't draw it. "Computer, transfer command authority to senior non-commissioned officer present." "Sergeant Rodriguez," Zakhtar's voice carried a dangerous edge, "you are relieving a superior officer. That is mutiny." "Sir, I'm relieving an officer who is allowing civilians to die when we have the capability to save them." Rodriguez turned to address the rest of the squad. "Anyone who wants to follow proper protocols can stay on this ship. The rest of you, grab your gear. We're going in." 11 of the 12 squad members stood up immediately. Only one human private, clearly terrified of the consequences, remained seated. Even he looked torn by the decision. Kriya was first to the equipment lockers, her warrior instincts finally finding a proper outlet. "For Captain Chen," she growled, strapping on her combat harness. Dex had already begun hacking into the ship's systems to override Zakhtar's commands. His fingers danced over holographic interfaces as he rerouted power and prepared their insertion craft for launch. "I'm detecting survivor clusters in multiple sections," he reported. "If we move fast, we can extract most of them before the reactor goes critical." Zakhtar activated his emergency communicator, undoubtedly to report the mutiny to Sector Command. But Rodriguez was beyond caring about consequences now. He'd spent too many years under Sarah's leadership, learning that sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring the chain of command. "Johnson," Rodriguez called to the younger soldier, "I won't order you to come with us. This is voluntary." Johnson looked around at his squad mates, all of them preparing for a mission that could end their careers even if they survived. Then he thought about Sarah Chen, who'd taken a chance on a green recruit and taught him that being a soldier meant more than just following orders. He stood up and grabbed his equipment. "Captain Chen taught us to be soldiers, not bureaucrats." The insertion craft launched despite Zakhtar's increasingly desperate orders to abort. Through the cockpit windows, they could see the research station's hull breaches leaking atmosphere into space, creating clouds of frozen crystals that caught the light from the nearby star. Rodriguez took command of the mission with the same calm competence he'd learned from Sarah. He divided the team into 3 groups, each targeting a different section of the station where survivors had been detected. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the reactor breach would make rescue impossible. The first group, led by Kriya, breached the outer hull of Section C7, where Dex had detected the critical life signs. They found 12 civilians, including 3 children, huddled in an emergency shelter with failing life support. Kriya's natural strength allowed her to carry 2 adults at once, while her team escorted the others to the evacuation point. Dex's group penetrated deeper into the station's core, following power conduits to a computer center where scientific staff had barricaded themselves behind security doors. His technical skills proved invaluable as he bypassed damaged systems and opened a path for extraction. Rodriguez led the final team into the most dangerous section, where the research director and her family were trapped near the failing reactor. The radiation levels were already approaching dangerous levels, and their environmental suits' protection wouldn't last long. Through their communication system, they could hear Zakhtar's increasingly frantic reports to Sector Command, describing the mutiny and demanding immediate intervention. But Sector Command was too far away to stop them, and the squad was committed to their course of action. As they extracted the final group of survivors, Dex's sensors detected the reactor's imminent failure. They had perhaps 2 minutes to clear the danger zone, and their insertion craft was already overloaded with refugees. "Rodriguez to all teams," he transmitted. "Reactor breach imminent. Execute emergency extraction now." They barely made it. The research station's reactor exploded just as their craft reached minimum safe distance, the explosion lighting up space like a temporary star. Behind them, 197 civilian lives were safe aboard their ship, while ahead of them lay the certain end of their military careers. Zakhtar's voice came over their communication system, cold with fury and authority. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you and your co-conspirators are under arrest for mutiny, insubordination, and violation of direct orders. You will surrender immediately upon return to base." Rodriguez looked around at his teammates, all of them exhausted, but satisfied with what they'd accomplished. They'd saved nearly 200 lives, but they'd also destroyed their futures in the coalition military. "Understood, sir," Rodriguez replied. "We'll face whatever consequences await us." As their ship turned toward the nearest coalition base, none of them noticed the encrypted communication being transmitted from a listening post several star systems away, carrying news of their actions to recipients who would find their decision very interesting indeed. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the morning air at Coalition Base Meridian like thunder rolling across the landscape. Commander Zakhtar looked up from the tribunal proceedings he was conducting against Rodriguez and his team, his serpentine neck craning toward the reinforced windows of the disciplinary chamber. 3 black aircraft descended toward the base's primary landing pad with military precision. They bore no standard coalition markings, only small flags that made several alien officers in the room suddenly straighten in recognition. Those were Earth flags, but more specifically, they carried the insignia of Terra Command, humanity's independent military branch that operated parallel to coalition forces. Colonel Mordun, who had traveled from Nexus 7 to personally oversee the court-martial of the mutinous soldiers, clicked his mandibles in irritation. "Who authorized human military vessels to land on this base?" Zakhtar activated his communication device. "Base control, identify incoming aircraft and their authorization codes." The response came back immediately, but the communications officer's voice carried an odd note of nervousness. "Sir, the aircraft are registered to Terra Command Special Operations. They're requesting immediate conference with Base Command regarding recent personnel actions." Before Zakhtar could respond, the chamber's main doors opened with a sharp hiss. A human guard entered, snapping to attention with obvious relief at seeing fellow humans about to arrive. "Sir," the guard addressed the alien officers, "Terra Command representatives are requesting immediate access to this facility. They claim jurisdiction over human personnel currently under detention." Zakhtar's 4 arms gestured dismissively. "Impossible. These soldiers are part of coalition forces and subject to coalition military justice. Terra Command has no authority here." The guard's expression suggested he disagreed, but was too disciplined to voice it. "Sir, they've presented documentation that suggests otherwise. Base Command is requesting your immediate presence in the administrative center." Rodriguez and his team exchanged glances from their positions at the defendant's table. They'd been sitting through 3 days of proceedings that seemed designed more to humiliate them than to determine justice. The charges were clear-cut: mutiny, insubordination, and violation of direct orders. The fact that they'd saved 197 lives was repeatedly dismissed as irrelevant to the question of military discipline. Now, suddenly, representatives from Earth were here. Rodriguez had heard rumors about Terra Command's growing independence from coalition oversight, but he'd never imagined it might affect their situation. The first helicopter had barely touched down when its doors opened and 3 figures emerged. Even at a distance, their bearing marked them as senior military officers. The lead figure was a woman in her 50s, wearing the distinctive black and silver uniform of Terra Command. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation style, and her stride spoke of someone accustomed to command authority. General Patricia Hawkins had arrived at Coalition Base Meridian with a specific mission and very little patience for bureaucratic delays. Beside her walked General Marcus Webb, a tall man with cybernetic implants marking him as a veteran of the Titan Wars, and General Sarah Kim, the youngest three-star general in Terra Command history. As they approached the main administrative building, alien personnel scattered from their path. Word had already spread through the base that Earth's military leadership had arrived unannounced and was demanding immediate access to the human prisoners. Base Commander Thelos, an elderly Valdoran who had served in the Coalition for 30 years, met them at the entrance to the administrative center. His usual calm demeanor showed cracks of uncertainty as he faced 3 human generals whose reputations preceded them. "Generals," he said carefully, "I was not informed of any Terra Command inspections scheduled for this facility." General Hawkins stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding respect across species lines. "Commander Thelos, we're not here for an inspection. We're here to collect our people." She handed him a data tablet containing official documentation. As of 0800 hours this morning, Terra Command formally invoked Article 7 of the Human Integration Accords. All human military personnel serving in Coalition units are hereby transferred to direct Terra Command authority. Thelos examined the documents with growing alarm. Article 7 was an emergency provision that allowed Earth to withdraw its military personnel from Coalition service in the event of systematic discrimination or abuse. It had never been invoked before. "General, this is highly irregular. The soldiers in question are charged with serious violations of military law." General Webb spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the mechanical undertones of his cybernetic voice box. "Commander, those soldiers acted to save civilian lives while their Coalition superior officer chose to follow procedures instead of preventing a massacre. Terra Command does not consider life-saving actions to be violations worthy of punishment." Commander Zach Tar arrived at that moment, having abandoned his tribunal to deal with this unprecedented situation. His scaled features showed clear agitation as he confronted the human officers. "This is unacceptable," he declared. "These soldiers are guilty of mutiny. They cannot simply be transferred away from justice." General Kim, who had remained silent until now, fixed Zach Tar with a stare that made several nearby Coalition personnel uncomfortable. "Commander, I've reviewed the complete mission files for your unit's response to the Rigel Station incident. Your decision to abandon 197 civilians to maintain procedural compliance represents exactly the kind of systematic failure that Article 7 was designed to address." She gestured to an aide who handed her another data tablet. "I'm also curious about your role in the discharge of Captain Sarah Chen. Her record shows 5 years of exemplary service, multiple commendations for life-saving actions, and the highest unit effectiveness ratings in her sector. Yet she was removed from command for, what was it? Inappropriate initiative during emergency situations?" Zakhtar's neck swayed in agitation. "Captain Chen repeatedly violated proper protocols. Military discipline requires—" "Military discipline," General Hawkins interrupted, "requires balancing adherence to procedure with mission effectiveness and preservation of life. Captain Chen's record indicates she understood that balance. Your record suggests you do not." Commander Thelos attempted to diffuse the escalating tension. "Generals, surely we can resolve this through proper diplomatic channels. The Coalition values its human membership." "Does it?" General Webb asked pointedly. "Because our review of human personnel files shows a disturbing pattern. Human officers consistently receive lower efficiency ratings despite superior mission results." Human units are systematically assigned to high-risk missions with inadequate support, and human military personnel are subject to disciplinary action for the same initiative and tactical flexibility that built Earth's military reputation. The implications of his words hung in the air like a challenge. Terra Command wasn't just retrieving a few soldiers. They were questioning the entire relationship between Earth and the Coalition. General Kim activated her communication device. "Colonel Morrison, bring our people out, all of them." Within minutes, Rodriguez and his team emerged from the disciplinary chamber under escort by Terra Command military police. Their relief was obvious as they saw familiar uniforms and human faces. Behind them, Colonel Mordoon and the other alien tribunal members followed, clearly frustrated by this turn of events. "Sergeant Rodriguez," General Hawkins addressed him directly, "Terra Command has reviewed your actions at Rigel Station. Your decision to prioritize civilian lives over procedural compliance represents the finest traditions of human military service. You and your team will be transferred to Terra Command, effective immediately." Rodriguez snapped to attention, though his voice carried obvious emotion. "Thank you, General. We're honored to serve." As the human soldiers prepared to depart with their new commanders, Colonel Morden made a final attempt to assert coalition authority. This sets a dangerous precedent. Military personnel cannot simply be transferred away from legal consequences. General Hawkins turned to face him directly. "Colonel, you're absolutely right. This does set a precedent. It establishes that Terra Command will not allow its personnel to be punished for saving lives, especially when their superiors would rather watch innocents die than deviate from procedure." She looked around at the assembled coalition officers, her voice carrying clearly across the landing area. "Let me be very clear about Terra Command's position. Any coalition officer who considers human initiative and life-saving actions to be disciplinary problems will find their human personnel transferred to commanders who appreciate those qualities." The first helicopter was already powering up as the rescued soldiers boarded. Through the windows, Rodriguez could see General Kim speaking quietly into her communication device, apparently coordinating something beyond the immediate extraction. General Webb approached Commander Zakhtar one final time. "Commander, I have one more piece of information that might interest you. Captain Sarah Chen, the officer you had discharged for inappropriate initiative, has been offered a position as Director of Tactical Operations for Terra Command Special Forces. Her first assignment will be establishing new protocols for rapid response and civilian protection missions." Zakhtar's scales darkened to a deeper blue, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "You cannot simply ignore coalition authority when it becomes inconvenient." "We're not ignoring it," General Hawkins replied as she boarded the second helicopter. "We're establishing that human lives and human military personnel will be protected by human authority when coalition authority fails to do so." As the three helicopters lifted off from Coalition Base Meridian, they carried more than just Rodriguez and his team. They carried a clear message that the relationship between Earth and the Galactic Defense Coalition had fundamentally changed. Colonel Mordoon watched the aircraft disappear into the distance, his mandibles working in agitation. "This will have consequences. The Coalition Council will not tolerate this level of independence from member species." Commander Thelos, who had worked with human personnel for years and generally respected their capabilities, looked troubled. "Perhaps it's time to consider whether our procedures adequately account for different species' approaches to military service." But Zakhtar was already planning his next move. "Contact Sector Command. I want a full review of all human personnel remaining in Coalition units. If Terra Command wants to play politics with military discipline, they'll find that two can play that game." None of the Coalition officers realized that their communications were being monitored by Terra Command intelligence assets, or that General Hawkins had prepared for exactly this kind of retaliation. 3 hours later, as the helicopters approached Terra Command's classified facility on the edge of human space, Rodriguez received a personal message on his secure communicator. The sender was listed as Director of Tactical Operations, Terra Command Special Forces. Sergeant Rodriguez, the message read, "Congratulations on your transfer to Terra Command. Your new assignment begins Monday. Report to Director Chen for mission briefing. Your unit will be designated Special Response Team Alpha. Mission: rescue operations that others consider impossible. Welcome to the team. Captain Sarah Chen." Rodriguez smiled as he shared the message with his teammates. Kria's growl of satisfaction needed no translation, while Dex's quiet nod indicated his approval of this turn of events. They'd lost their careers in the coalition, but they'd gained something more important: the chance to serve under leaders who valued life over procedure. As their helicopter disappeared into hyperspace toward Terra Command headquarters, a new chapter in human military history was beginning. One that would soon prove that sometimes getting fired is just the beginning of finding where you really belong.